All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking time to your day to be here today. I'm District 3 Councilwoman Phyllis Viagran. I represent the south and southeast side of San Antonio. I want to thank the DSD staff for opening the boardroom space for us to host this important data center stakeholder meeting today. We did want to make this kind of open for the entire city of San Antonio, even though we're going to talk a little specifically about District 3, the south and the southeast side, and what's happening. But we know that this issue is important for all of us citywide. And so you should have received an agenda and overview handouts to help you follow and learn more about our speakers that are presenting today. If you didn't receive one, please raise your hand. I've got my ambassadors here that can help and make sure you get one. So today we take another step forward, and I want to also provide some background of our sustainability and resiliency championing journey. Dr. Bassel Dyer and I connected back in 2023 at a Food, Energy, Water, Health Nexus workshop at Texas A&M University, San Antonio. Since then, we have hosted many workshops and 3 citywide sustainability symposiums. You can see that's where we started, 2023. One of our citywide sustainability symposiums. And then in 2025, we were at the Energy Summit, and I won the Outstanding Government Award that I was nominated for. Thank you very much, Dr. Dyer, for that. And then in 2026, we had our first stakeholder meeting focused on data centers. The one thing I'd like to do right now is share a special a clip of a video that we're kind of talking on this journey. It really has been a resiliency journey, but data centers have kind of taken the focus. So we're going to go ahead and roll that clip. While we're waiting for the clip to load, hopefully it does. If it doesn't, we'll move on. But I did want to introduce my ambassadors, Periel and Chrissy. If you could raise your hand. These are my summer ambassadors helping. I also have Addie, my communications director, and Chris here, which some of you know if you've done planning and zoning. And if we can't show that video now, we'll try and see what the bandwidth is and get to show it later. So one thing that we understood, or that I understood as I began this process, is this is a multi-layered, very kind of nuanced process that we have here. And so it's really important that we get the speakers in and we hear from the community, and that includes all the community, which is our stakeholders, our different departments, and thank you sustainability and resiliency for being here, and then our utilities, which you'll hear from later. So as you can see on our first speaker, Dr. Dyer comes to us from Texas A&M University in Energy Institute. He is the Assistant Director of Sustainable Development at Texas A&M Energy Institute, an adjunct assistant professor in biological and agricultural engineering, and a research fellow at the Institute of Science, Technology, and Public Policy at Texas A&M University. He's going to be presenting first, and then we will have, I will introduce our speakers following him, which will be SAW, Donovan Burton, CPS Energy, Ben Jordan, Nick Bennett, and the data centers on the south side, Russell Yeager's talking to them, but I'll come back up and introduce you to them also. And then at the end, we'll have a brief Q&A so you can ask questions. So you've got the handouts, make sure you take some notes. We do want to hear from you as we move forward, understand the commitment, and I believe I do have District 5 here and different departments here, that as we move forward, we want to do this in a thoughtful way. And so thank you for being here, and I will now Do we have Dr. Dyer's slideshow present? I will invite Dr. Dyer up to present. Thank you very much.
As we say at Texas A&M, howdy. I love the logo here, but I want to confirm that I'm here representing Texas A&M University and not the United Nations, even though a lot of the work that we've been doing with Councilwoman Viagran and District 3 has been centered around a lot of the sustainability goals and localizing them in District 3 and for the city of San Antonio, which has really been a great opportunity and a platform that allowed us to bring representatives from across different sectors and across different disciplines in order to discuss these cross-sectoral sustainability issues. So in my presentation today, I'll try to make it as engaging as possible, especially toward the end, because this is really, I see this as an opportunity to hear from all of you, especially on key concerns that we can see from the community, but also key opportunities that could come with developing these data centers and as Councilwoman Viagran said, developing them responsibly and mindfully. And I'd like to start with this image and to really emphasize that data centers, as other infrastructure and as other development opportunities or technologies, are not necessarily inherently good or bad, but it's the way we do them, where we do them, the technologies we use, the considerations we take, the questions we ask, is what will determine which future we move forward into. Do we do this responsibly, engaging stakeholders that need to be engaged, asking the right questions as we develop and respond to this demand for high compute, which, whether we like it or not, is going to be on the rise, and it's something that we also need to be mindful of and respond to as we move forward. So in terms of the overall objectives of the workshop and meeting today, is to try to share some evidence from the literature, from the science that we're seeing in terms of impact of data centers, positive and negative, from different case studies at the national and at the state level here in Texas. It's great that we'll get the chance to hear from utilities and hopefully also a representation from data center operators on key challenges, opportunities, and operational realities, plans and commitments regarding data centers, and to really create this platform and make available this platform for District 3 and City of San Antonio more broadly to weigh into that process and to share perspectives, priorities, concerns about this topic and this emerging topic. Some of the key outcomes that we're expecting out of this engagement today are to have a record, again, of priorities and concerns regarding data center development in San Antonio, identify some opportunities through which data center investment can prevent or offset unintended consequences, and we'd like to hear from you on ideas you'd like to ask of data centers as we consider different opportunities to do that and different commitments from data centers to do that, as well as to inform a research agenda that is shaped by the community, by voices from within the community, in order to develop evidence-based research that could guide decision-making that is grounded in science and in facts and in research that we can develop and support our local officials in making those decisions. I'd like to start with this map of Texas here that you see on the left. This is a study we conducted published back in 2019, where we looked at all of these dots you see here on the map are water wells from Texas Water Development Board data. The green dots you see are water wells for agriculture. The blue dots are water wells for urban development. Red dots are water wells mostly for industrial use, a lot of it for hydraulic fracturing. You can see the Eagle Ford Shale and a lot of the energy activity in the West. And all of these sectors are projected to grow. As we look at 2030 and 2050 horizon, all of these sectors are projected to grow. Demand for water is growing over these growing sectors with little communication and coordination that's necessarily happening across this sector, which we also learned through an NSF-funded project that we worked on in San Antonio, where as a result of one of the surveys we conducted, we saw that little communication is happening across the different sectors. And moving to a more recent map that's published by the Texas Energy Institute at UT, where you see a lot of the locations of the data centers, either existing or planned. And the background you see here is the counties with annual freshwater shortage and surplus projected by 2040. So while in some cases we see data centers over areas where we're projecting surplus projections, and we have a lot of shortages also in a lot of these areas, which also require a closer look, and especially as we look at this emerging user as an additional user in addition to agriculture, energy, mining, as well as urban, which are already growing. So these are some of the discussions we've been having over the past several years with Councilwoman and with a lot of the representatives across the sectors to have these cross-sectoral discussions. And the idea of this engagement specifically that started back in February, focused on data centers, emerged from the last sustainability symposium we had in January, where the topic of data centers got a lot of interest from the community that was attending, and there was really an appetite and an interest to learn more and engage more in that discussion. So we started back in February with an initial meeting where the focus was to learn from other peer districts that already host data centers, to learn from key emerging issues, concerns, opportunities that other council members have seen across the different districts, and also that meeting was with participation from SAWS and CPS as well. This meeting today, we're bringing more of the community representation, also hear more voices in the room, so we can engage more broadly in this discussion. And the hope and the outcome of this, of these two meetings and the outputs from those will inform the research agenda moving forward. So what do we know at the national level is that the U.S. is by far leading in terms of data centers globally, and it has nearly 3,900 data centers, more than the next 7 countries combined, and that number is expected to double by 2030. So again, this is driven by our growing need for high-performance computation that has become part of our daily life and going to continue growing. So the emerging need for that is there, and the real question becomes, how do we do this as responsibly as possible? In terms of electricity consumption, at the US level, it's expected to more than double by 2030, electricity consumption by US data centers. And also electricity costs have risen somewhat in the past decade, partially resulting from data centers that, especially in places that are geographically close to these data centers. Now we have different research that's sharing different messages. In one study by the International Energy Research shows, the Institute for Energy Research shows that there's no statistical significant correlation between the number of data centers in a state and its current electricity prices, and that's looking really at the more granular, at the more aggregate picture at the state level. But also in another study where we look more, we zoom in and look at specific nodes through which are hosting different data centers, we have seen cases where prices have risen as much as 267% for households, especially in areas where we have major data center concentration. So scale matters, and the more we zoom in and zoom out, put things into context, and really emphasizes the importance of having these discussions at the local level rather than at the larger aggregate level. We have the same story also with water, where if we look at a national level, we can see that in this Wilson Center study here, that data centers direct water withdrawals represent less than 0.04% of the total water that we use compared to other sectors. But again, same story with scale. The number seems low at the national aggregate level, but as we move into more of the local level, we start seeing stories like the Dale County in Oregon, where one data center is consuming about 30% of the city's water supply. So again, scale matters, and seeing, localizing, understanding the local impact of these data centers and where they're located and where does it make sense for them to be located is a question that needs to be asked and properly vetted. Now, what can data centers deliver? We have many instances and cases where we see tax revenue resulting from these data centers, where in cases like Loudoun County in Virginia, that resulted in cost of homeowner property taxes or tax rates, saving average households roughly $3,000 a year. We also see in the short term construction-related jobs, so short-term employment, which also is a result of this development, as well as community investment is also possible when negotiated, when we're talking about investing in different grant programs for STEM education, for workforce development, for sustainability initiatives, etc. All of these are possible if properly negotiated for with these data centers. What could go wrong, and some of the key challenges that we hear, in addition to the water and energy-related questions and concerns, noise-related concerns, few permanent jobs relative to the footprint and the resources being used, and we've been seeing stories across the state and across the country on community opposition to different data centers, and a lot of that stems from not knowing enough and not having enough transparency in some cases on some of the questions, especially related to water and energy use. So as we look at the ERCOT also and the electricity grid, the ERCOT electricity demand is projected to grow by 11% annually, and more than 20 to 120 gigawatts of large projects have requested to connect to the Texas grid, and over 70 of those are related to data centers. So again, we can see with that growth and across ERCOT. Now on the policy side, one of the things we've been seeing, and since last June, Texas approved Senate Bill 6, which aims to require large electricity customers, including data centers, to bear more of the costs and responsibilities of connecting and operating on the ERCOT grid in order to ensure that we're improving reliability, transparency, and fairness. So through that new law, it requires large loads to share transmission line costs, set up remote disconnected capabilities to let ERCOT curtail power use, have backup generation, as well as make that backup generation available for ERCOT during emergencies. We also very recently, the past couple of weeks, saw an announcement by Governor Abbott also talking about different priorities with the upcoming 2027 legislation or legislative meeting, to look at requiring new facilities to add power generation to the state's power grid, require data centers to pay their own grid interconnection and infrastructure costs, mandate the use of closed-loop systems, so pushing companies really to become more mindful of the technologies and water use, so again, which draw large amounts of water at the start, but reuse it over some period of time. So we're talking about the closed-loop water systems. Also requiring annual reporting by all data centers on electricity and water use, which has been very much voluntary or non-existent until now. Establishing best practices, standards to address community concerns like noise, and repealing data center sales tax exemptions. So at least these are now emerging as part of these priorities for the next session, and it's and that's very much a reflection of the concerns that we've been seeing on many of these topics, especially related to water and energy. Now, with the Public Utility Commission, we also saw in the past few months a survey that has been issued, also a voluntary survey for data centers to report on their water use. The report will be submitted to the legislator and governor by the end of the year. So this would give an idea of some of the companies who have reported and give us some more information on some of these numbers and some of the specs of these data centers. But again, participation was voluntary, and there's not a lot of information on who has participated in that at this point. Zooming into San Antonio specifically, we currently have around 56 data centers across the city, across different districts, and we have different proposals also coming for new data centers across different counties, and with 91 data centers coming to Travis and Bexar counties alone, which also is putting local officials in a place where we're asking these questions on whether we need to move forward or not. How do we evaluate these data centers and the location that are being proposed? Are there different alternative locations we can look at in cases where there are pressures on water systems or energy systems? Are we asking the right questions? So a lot of this discussion is focused on getting more insight on the process and vetting that needs to happen as part of this process to make sure that the development of these data centers are done in a responsible way and in a way that meets the expectations and needs of the community in the long term. So this is by no means taking a side with or against, but really taking an objective, evidence-based approach to evaluating the impact and alignment with priorities and needs of the community long term. So to share maybe a few high-level reflections from the last meeting, the first meeting that we had in February. So again, the discussion was not framed with or against, but with the importance of being prepared and asking the right questions and focusing on the evidence that could guide evidence-based decision-making. There were some concerns raised regarding rising utility bill, construction noise and traffic, 24-hour lighting, and loss of urban canopy. Data centers are generally not problematic in commercial settings, but residents wanted more transparency, especially on rates and fair cost sharing, which was also a concern within hearing. Also verification of actual water and energy use, which goes back to that transparency question, and the need for data centers to really demonstrate commitment to the community through different investments, whether through infrastructure, grant programs, workforce development, sustainability initiatives, or others that we're hoping to hear more from the community today also on what ideas are a priority for the community in order to be asked from the data centers. Also, community benefits agreements were discussed as a model tied to tax abatements or development approvals, securing investments in weatherization, affordable housing, STEM education, etc. And also there was a reflection on that not all data centers are the same. Some are bigger than others, some require more resources than others, and therefore policy frameworks should account for that range and take those specs into consideration. Some data operators are willing to engage transparently, and that has been voiced in the discussion. Some are not. So again, I don't know with the growing legislative push now toward more transparency and reporting, whether that would change over time. And there was also an emphasis on the need for collaborating across silos, across different sectors, across different departments, because this development, as any other development, impacts our social, economic, environmental metrics as a city and as a community, and need to be vetted through that lens and through collaboration and input from different players in the room. So I'd like to stop here and would like to hear from you and invite you to engage. So it's not only a one-way conversation, and would like really to hear from you especially on a few questions related to your top concerns, but also ideas for different programs and investments that you see are important to be perhaps negotiated or committed by data centers as we evaluate these different proposals. So I'd like to invite you to scan the QR code so we could have a live interaction. And the first question, maybe we can switch to the other screen so we can see the results live.
You did log into your computer as well over here.
I'd like to start with the first question on asking about your top concern regarding data center development in San Antonio. Just to get some quick reflections from the group. We can see lighting, location, water consumption, timeline, noise, community investment, noise, water usage. Environmental health impacts, utility consumption, overregulation, energy demand, so several have highlighted water usage. Looks like a top issue. Elon Musk. Heat island, community investment, So really, in many ways, really reflecting a lot of the issues that have been highlighted in the presentation that we hear nationally. See, heat was an interesting addition, maybe, to that I didn't mention specifically. Right, I see 3 people more are typing. Maybe we can move to the next question. Could we go to the next slide, please? So the next question is, if data centers invested in our community, which programs would you most wanted to fund? So what is a priority for the community in terms of the type of programs that you think data centers should commit to and invest in? Looking at sustainability and water stewardship initiatives, local infrastructure projects, roads, water, parks, workforce development and job training, or other ideas, and STEM education in schools. And we'll have a follow-up questions on the others also to get some ideas from you on what's on your mind and what are different possibilities. I think we have 24 who have participated so far. With almost half prioritizing, or 42% prioritizing sustainability and water stewardship initiatives. Right? Maybe we can move to the third. I think you'll have access to these, and if you still haven't answered. So can you be more specific about what programs you would like to see data centers invest in? So whether across the categories we just selected from, or if you had other ideas. So again, looking at STEM-related, workforce development, sustainability, infrastructure, or others. Do you have any other ideas that city needs to be aware of, the data center operators need to be aware of? What does the community prioritize? Funding low-income energy efficiency and renewable programs, resilient infrastructure, utility transportation infrastructure, water recycling, place green spaces, transportation, roads, care and expansion. Would like them not to get special. I missed it. Aquifer protection, creative, innovative public projects, improve infrastructure, education grants programs, transparency, water conservation. Great. I think this is a great list of ideas that will also inform leadership at the local level and at the city level, as well as the data center operators in terms of what's on people's minds. Building underground, local businesses, wildlife protection. Thank you all for your thoughts and input. Can we move to the next one? So how much do you currently trust data center companies to deliver the commitments they make? 1 being low, 5 being high. See 20 people have participated so far. So we have a distribution, but certainly more than half have low trust currently, which also is an issue we need to acknowledge and be aware of. 25 people. So the follow-up question to that, please if we can move to the next slide, please, is how can that trust be improved? So from your perspective, what would it take for you to have greater trust with these data center operators? development agreements, transparency, more transparency, strict zoning laws, build in the ocean, more transparency, a lot of transparency, more community engagement, development agreements, communication with the community, better regulation by local governments, zoning, accountability. So this is a service for the data center operators in the room. You're seeing firsthand what's on the community's mind in terms of how to improve trust. Improve marketing, communication with the community, zoning requirements. All right. Don't build Skynet. Talk to the community members. So a lot of emphasis on community engagement, a lot of emphasis on transparency, investment and sustainability, and zoning requirements. Okay. We move to the last question. What should the city require before approving data centers? So thinking of the whole approving process and then thinking, sitting in the city's shoes, what do you think are some things that should be non-negotiables that represent your priorities that the city should require before approving a data center? Community benefits agreements, strict zoning, backup power, compliance with UDC. Design sustainability standard, limit location and noise, community meeting, managing noise, how much pollution, exit plan, development agreement, provide own water and power. It's great that we have SAWS and CPS for this. Hear more on that, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not really sure what's happening. Are those questions that you put together?
Yes.
Oh, well,
Yes, I mean, this is...
Will there be a time that we can ask you questions about your presentation?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, this was just an opportunity to just get a sense and the voices in the room. So since we do have limited time and we'll get engagement, but this will give us an overall sense and ideas of what are some of the key priorities and thoughts that are on our community's mind. All right, so this was the last question. Again, thank you very much for participating and for providing this input. This would be very valuable input, I'm sure, for different parties, including Councilwoman Viagran, other district members, but also different actors in the room as well. So I hope this was useful, and I hope to engage in a broader dialogue, and would be happy to entertain any questions. Thank you.
Just to keep this rolling along, and so we give all our speakers an opportunity to speak, and I think I do want to, Dr. Dyer is here to answer questions afterwards, but I'm going to bring up Donovan Burton, Senior Vice President of Water Resources and Government Relations for San Antonio Water Systems. I think we all saw water usage was at the top of that list. So before we get into Q&A, I do want Donovan to come and speak, and then we'll go to the next, which was clean energy and utilities. We'll have CPS speak next. But Donovan, if you want to go ahead and talk a little about it. And yes, if you've seen an article and there's a quote, it's probably from Donovan.
All right, thank you, Councilwoman. And thank you, Councilwoman and City, for bringing this together. I think this is a good process, a lot of good stakeholders in the room. And it's actually, it's exactly what Dr. Dyer talks about and what all of you talked about, the transparency. I think a lot of good things, as long as we get everybody in the same room, we can work things out. So I'm just going to talk, obviously, specifically about the water side. I know there are a lot of other things that you can talk about on data centers, but we see the data centers as both a challenge and an opportunity. I think it is an entirely manageable issue from a water side. A couple of caveats, and I want to talk through some of those. What we are going to do at SAWS is bring some of you guys in, some kind of sort of a policy discussion. We're probably going to roll out some policy ideas over the next few months, and we want to talk that through with industry stakeholders and all stakeholders basically involved in it. And we'll be having this discussion with our SAWS board over the next few months and City Council. So a lot of people involved, and I appreciate this room. So. The first slide, just obviously getting the knowledge is the most important thing. A lot of studies going on around the nation of water use, energy use, and just generally the natural resource usage. And so we're following all of that, reading them all. They're all over the map. There are lots of water usage in one place is not the water usage in another. So we're following all the research and leading it all. We'll go to this slide. All of you know that it's really the two main terms in terms of water usage. It's really about evaporative cooling or a closed loop system of the server cooling process. What I want to talk about, obviously the more we can get into closed loop systems, the better on the water side. And I think that's where the industry is generally going, maybe almost entirely going, certainly in a heavy approach that way. Our issue is just on the evaporative cooling side. So it's all manageable from the closed loop system. We want to talk a little bit more from a policy side on the evaporative cooling. Just how much are we using already in the system? The existing data centers are not really the AI centers here in San Antonio. We've got about 25 of them that are dedicated to that particular purpose. The total potable usage is about 98, almost 100 acre feet of water. And that's 0.1%. Just to give you an idea, our annual usage in acre feet, all water usage in San Antonio is somewhere around 270,000 acre feet. So 100 acre feet is about 0.1% of the potable usage, and just a little over a percentage of the entire recycled water usage. Obviously, the AI data centers are the ones with the current requests and the ones I think that most of us are talking about. We can see a little bit of an increase in the potable water side, but again, it stays in the 0.3 range of potable water usage, 600 acre feet in terms of requests. On the recycle side, about 3,000 acre feet, a little bit plus. There's still some unknown information of requests that are out there for our recycled water for the data centers. Again, some of them we're still waiting on, and some of them we're still negotiating sort of back and forth. That makes up about 12% of our entire recycled water usage, so very manageable again. I do want to caveat, and I'll talk about this in just a little bit, that 3,000 is in the future. What we have left that's about probably 30% of the water that's still available to be used in our existing system. I'll talk about that a little bit more. SAWS is a little bit better. San Antonio is a little bit better adapt to handle some of the data center usages because of our recycled water system. It makes us a little bit better suited to handle the use. Our recycle system is really the largest in the nation. It's a direct purple pipe network. I'll go through that, but so better than some particular areas to be able to handle it. It is a lower cost as well, for an extremely lower cost than potable source, and it's a good stewardship of the environment and particularly of the potable water systems that are out there. Our existing recycled water network is a purple pipe that goes all around San Antonio. Generally, again, nothing, you see it's squiggly, nothing is perfect, but generally around the 410 corridor. And you can see how it kind of almost comes to a closed, I'll call a closed loop system at the bottom. That is an important piece. We're going to talk about that a little bit, is making sure that those two pieces are looped up. But there are some triangles on that slide that are water recycling plants, basically wastewater plants. That is where the recycled water comes from after it's cleaned up, before it's discharged into the environment. We capture some of it and put it through that recycle network. And that is where the water is going through. You can see the blue dots are the existing data centers that are out there, and then the red squares are where the future, or at least the existing requests that we have for future data centers. All of them are generally locating close enough to the recycled water system that we think that's where they will be linked up to. So how much water do we have in the system? So through our wastewater plants, our water recycling centers, we have 3 of them I mentioned, and out of all 3 of them, there are almost 160,000 acre feet of water that was produced, that went through the system and was available for either discharge or for use. 50,000 of that, I'll start at the bottom, 50,000 of that is allocated to CPS Energy. That is what the Browning and Calaveras Lake are, so it keeps the lights on. So that's 50,000 acre feet that is allocated to CPS for our energy purposes. Another 50,000 acre feet is for downstream flow. People downstream know probably more of what we're doing in San Antonio than San Antonians do a lot of times. But we have to make sure that the basin estuary systems have water, and that is if we were to shut that water off, it would dry up the basin estuary. So that needs to stay in the rivers. So we've got 100,000 of it immediately allocated for downstream uses. Then we have a current recycled water system that I just showed you, and its capacity is 30,000 acre feet. You can see how it's kind of colored on there. We've got about 20,000 acre feet of it being used today. So 2/3 of it is already spoken for through a contract or through some other use. So we have probably 10,000 acre feet left of our recycle system, of our existing recycle system, to be able to utilize for the data centers that are out there. Not just data centers, there are other uses for it, and I can talk about those. And then we have additional 27, almost 30,000 acre feet of water available at the plants. We don't have the infrastructure in place to move that water yet. So any future expansion of our recycle system would need an entirely new network similar to what I showed you in that purple pipe system. Let me just touch on the uses again. One thing as a policy question we have to decide is, how are we going to use this recycled water? Again, data centers will have a lot of that use, but there are also lots of other uses for recycled water. More water into the river. We've had a lot of people that would like for more water to go into the river. Councilwoman has talked about maybe using a direct potable use for it. Lots of different uses for our recycled water, and we as a community have to decide what's the highest and best use for that water. But the key to this is the molecules are there, we just have to make sure we have the infrastructure in place. So the infrastructure, this is back to that same purple pipe that I mentioned, but it generally works in kind of 2 legs. So it's not water that we can just put in one side and go all the way around in any direction. We can move water from, we have a west leg and an east leg. You see the colors there. The west leg is the yellow and the blue is the east leg. We can generally move water from west to east. Moving water east to west is more difficult, only in the terms of infrastructure. We need some more pumps and pipes to make that happen a little better. And so a key here, a key piece of this is the system, the infrastructure system, while it can move 30,000 acre feet throughout, will need some infrastructure improvements to be able to connect these 2 lines a little bit better. That probably means some more pumps at the north end, and that means a connection at the bottom of it, so that we can move water a little more freely from left to right and east to west. That's an important piece of what we'll need, particularly for the redundancy on the data centers. Data centers need a lot of redundancy and reliability. The recycle system is not like our potable system with lots of reliability. It's kind of one loop. You can only kind of go one way. And so we have to build in some of that recycled infrastructure. This for all the engineers, both of you engineers in the room. We're going to talk, it's a hydraulic capacity. Again, the line really is, we can move water east and west, as I mentioned, but we really only have a certain amount of hydraulic capacity within the line. And you can see it's really directed by the heavy months. And so what we're limited to is essentially that arrow back and forth with our existing system. Again, that comes to about 10,000 acre feet. I'll let our engineers talk about this slide more. In terms of costs, I mentioned costs. So the recycled water costs are a lot less than our potable water costs. This is just kind of a comparison between our recycled and potable for all of our classes of uses. So residential, it's about 40% of the cost of residential. General, 47%. Irrigation, 20%. So it's a very low cost option, the recycled water system is. And that's done mostly on purpose, somewhat just cost of service. We have to pay for cost of service, but we also want to promote the use of recycled water because it keeps people off of the potable water system. So that's a benefit in and of itself. But I think this is one thing that will drive a lot of companies to want the recycled water system. The last thing, and this is really the council members, mayor, asked to make sure that the recycled water system, using it in a data center or any evaporative cooling type process, is it safe? Are people going to get sick? This was a specific question, and the answer is clearly yes. Not yes, though. It's fine. The equipment must be maintained, and so data centers just need to make sure that they're maintaining the chlorine residual mostly, and so we'll want to talk about that from a policy perspective as well. City Council and our board and others have asked us for more policy issues and how we're going to handle data centers going forward. This was a CCR's, the council consideration request last year, and they want to know what's the demand, what are SAWs and CPS coordinating, what's the technologies available, and are there health risks? So we're answering some of those policy questions, and that's the conversation that we need to have. So very specific policy matters that I want to talk through real quick. And there are lots of different policy discussions. There's legislative and governor and agencies, city council. Everyone is talking about it from a policy side. From SAWS, it's really about the evaporative cooling piece and how can we minimize that while at the same time maximizing the use of recycled water. We want to maximize recycled water, but we also want to minimize evaporative cooling not only for the server cooling piece, but also a lot of the data center industries want to get started yesterday. So the sooner they can get started, the better. And as long as those energy production systems that you bring in, the data centers will bring in, as long as those are water efficient and, I'll say it, not evaporative cooling, it makes the process a whole lot easier and a whole lot easier discussion. That's where the high water usage comes from, is the evaporative cooling. The other is just the redundancy and reliability of the system. I talked about that a little bit in the previous slides. What we are doing, we're doing an engineering recycled water master plan. We're taking that to our board in July, in a couple of weeks. Assuming they are good with that, they will approve it and we'll get started on an engineering plan. That will identify a lot of the reliability projects that we can put in and ultimately use in a rate structure to be able to make sure that we're able to pay for those projects. And then, so that's where the modified rates come in. We already have a rate system in place. What we don't have is an impact fee process in place for recycled water. So we'll probably talk about that. And then finally, the contamination controls that I talked about is just making sure that the data centers put in place chlorine residual mechanisms. That's really my presentation from a high level. We'll answer questions after the next one.
All right, thank you, Donovan. And the one thing that I've been confident in the SAWS team is to give me answers in terms of where we are with our water system and what we need in terms of technology. And that's come from them and talking to advocates for water, the Office of Sustainability and Resiliency, and how we move forward, because we know water is important all around. But next, y'all talked about clean energy, y'all talked about utilities. So part of this process started with making sure that I had the buy-in from our public utilities. And as you know, while we as the City of San Antonio oversee SAWS and CPS, they are run by their own board, they're run by their own administrative team, but they have been very helpful in this process. And when asked to come present, they did say yes. So right now, we've got Ben Jordan, Senior Director, Integrated System Planning, that is going to come and speak on CPS Energy. And Nick's here just to sit and answer any questions later. All right, so Ben, come on up.
Thank you for that introduction, Councilwoman. And I think I'll call an audible here, and I'm going to bring makeup here, just for fun. But hey, everybody, good afternoon, and thank you for having me here today, and to be, just in this arena, and to really have the conversation about what we see, from the utility perspective and what we're doing, for like Councilwoman Viagran said, this past Monday, the board approved our generation plan moving forward. And part of that is the clean energy aspect of it and how we're continuing to move forward in a harmonized way for the long term, right? We're looking at this from a long-term perspective, and that's our focus. So today I'm going to talk about just the load growth that we have seen, some of the cost recovery mechanisms that we have in place, how we protect customer costs and reduce the risk for any customers in the larger segments that we're starting to see across the entire state of Texas and nation. And then some of the other things that Dr. Dyer mentioned about, the Senate Bill 6 of the regulatory environment that is requiring us to pivot as a utility to provide, new solutions for these kinds of customers. And then, we'll talk regulatory a little bit. So as a utility, we are obligated to serve, right? We do have rules and regulations that says we have a customer that makes an energy request. We have to figure out how we're going to serve them. Doesn't mean we're going to serve them tomorrow, like we may get a request to say, I want X amount of energy tomorrow. There's a process that we have in place to bring customers on, depending on the amount of energy that they ask for. So that's what we do. So the recent asks that you guys have seen over the last couple of years, we started to see larger energy requests above and beyond kind of normal manufacturing, things of that nature. We still do see normal residential growth. We see small commercial. We see large commercial growth. Now we see larger energy requests, specifically for data center type customers, which is really outgrown a process. So we put a process in place to develop how we're going to intake this customer and how we're going to put contracts in place to help protect the utility and the citizens for any costs. And then you can start to see the regulatory discussions that are out there that are really behind this as well. And so we have processes in place that have existed forever, like rate recovery. We do cost of service studies and things of that nature. And so that's really what the message here on this slide is, just really about all the regulatory agencies that we are collaborating with, and the changing environment, changing behavior in the customer request, and what we're seeing, and how we plan for growth. So just kind of jump into it. We have an obligation to make sure that customers are paying their fair share. Also, we talk about the laws, so we can't just make up a rate. We can't just make them pay this or that. There is a formal regulatory process in place as a municipal utility that we have to put in place to say, here's what the cost is that we can charge for a customer for standard service. What this shows is when you ask us for redundancy, and I think Donovan mentioned it, a lot of the requests that we're seeing for data centers to be running 24/7, 365 is that reliability that's in place. And so I think everyone in here has probably had an outage from time to time. Nobody across the service areas is completely immune to an outage, right? And so they are very risk averse when it comes to outage perspective. So we have bonds in place, surety bonds in place. So when we order long lead equipment, that is, if a customer says, hey, I got a large energy request, I'm going to order a lot of equipment, we'll put a security bond in place. In the event that a customer changes their mind and backs out, we can pull on that bond and get reimbursed for any cost that was out, that we had put out. And anything above and beyond in the contributions in aid of construction, where they say, hey, I want an extra this, or I want to double that, so it's above and beyond what we call standard service, the customer pays full price for that. So that is not there's nothing that is above, like anything above and beyond standard service, the customer is paying for up front. And then when we get into, as the project develops into further maturity, we do have clawback provisions. So if a customer says, hey, I want 100 megawatts by 2030, well then we will track that on an annual basis, and contractually we have processes in place for us to meet. If the customer says, hey, I should be at 50 megawatts by next year, and they're at 25, they're still going to pay for that 50 megawatts contractually. So that we're being made whole, so that our cost recovery over a 10-year period is being made whole. Because that goes back to what I said earlier about how we set rates, and the cost recovery and behavior of how you use energy is a part of that rate recovery. Recently, we did start study fees because we started to see a lot more complicated studies, more detailed studies that we needed to do as a utility to make sure that we're still paying attention to reliability, to make sure that we're not sacrificing the reliability of the transmission system and the energy we provide to the community as we bring on larger customers that would threaten that. So we're being very mindful of that. So we're charging for study fees now, which is, we have checkpoints in there, but it's not small. I mean, it's $150,000 fee that we're charging for anything above 75 megawatts. So that is some of the things that we're putting in place to make sure that the amount of energy requests we're seeing are real customers that are behind it. And the next slide, I'll jump into really a little bit about what we're seeing, and how it's progressed a little bit as we've started to put these checks and balances in place by developing a process. You can really start to see how we're getting down. We should be getting down to more real customers here in the next few years. Cynical 6 on the bottom, we'll do that at the last slide. So this slide is a really cool slide. I think we presented at the City Council B session on March 4th. So this is a very similar slide deck to what was presented on March 4th. Now, I'll spend a little bit of time here because it's a lot on here, right? So you think about at the top of that funnel, it's the speculative customers and the amount of energy requests that we've seen, right? And so I'll try to, a lot of numbers on here. So you think, let's look at that bottom number where it says 146. So 26 gigawatts is the amount of requested energy we saw in January. The city of San Antonio is about 6 gigawatts, right? So just let that sink in a little bit, right? That's a tremendous amount of energy requests that we saw. So we put process in place to go, okay, let's listen to the regulatory agencies that, when I mentioned Senate Bill 6 on the last slide, that was really the intent. They own property. They're non-duplicative. They're doing all these things to make sure that there's a real customer behind it. Also, on top of that, there's a $50,000 per megawatt that's been stood up in the process, so that securitization, so that to protect the transmission investments also as part of this process. So as you start putting checks and balances in place, you start to see the behavior of changing, and some of the customers, as we work through the process, they're saying, hey, maybe they're going to go back to a different kind of development, or maybe they're going to look at something else. But what we saw a year or two ago was really a mad rush to make a significant amount of energy requests. And so now we've put a lot of processes in place to kind of go, okay, let's work through getting down to the real customers. So we're aligning with the regulatory agencies, PUC and ERCOT, no different from that. And then all of our things that we can control contractually is all the things I talked about earlier that are helping us kind of work through and get down to what real customers are. They were going to be moving forward. So you can see we went from 25 speculative projects to 21, 23 to 11. The projects that stayed in the agreement phase, they're still there, right? We're still working with them. And Russell's probably going to talk about this later in his presentation, but there is a long regimented process that goes through when we get into an agreement phase. There's additional agreements that we've also put in process to make sure that we're protecting the customers as well. And then so you can kind of see over time that's gone from 59 projects that we saw overall to 26 gigawatts down to 17, right? 16, right? And so this is the things that we're working on to put process in place and making sure that our efforts are being focused on some of the projects. Some of the financial impacts I touched on a little bit earlier, but just, on the economic contributions, being the municipality, Councilwoman Viagran mentioned, every 100 megawatts of large load that when we get a meter spinning, 20, 25 megawatts, there's 29 million of non-fuel revenue that CPS Energy receives, and so about $8 million of that goes to the city paying on an annual basis. I mentioned that we do have cost recovery mechanisms in place, so I touched on that already, and then the customer protections. But you can see the things that we're doing and putting in place to really be mindful and thoughtful about how we're paying attention to this customer. And I'll ask, here's what I'll do. I'll ask Nick to kind of help close out the next few slides that we've got here. But essentially, you see the transmission line on the upper right-hand side. We're doing other things on the transmission system to really help enable, what's that kind of, how much more use can we speak with our transmission system, essentially, by creating additional visibility and monitoring on that. So transmission engineers are hard work to look at how do we utilize existing infrastructure that we have in place that would offset some costs initially. So there's a lot of other things that we're doing inside to really help maximize and be as efficient as possible as we can with the area electron that's being requested. And we are, I'll let Nick tee up the on-site generation request that we're starting to see now. But without further ado, Nick Ben.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben. It's funny. We've been kind of living and breathing this for the last 3+ years. Every time I see that funnel slide, it's still shocking how many megawatts that translates to, right? So Ben talked about we're 6,000 megawatts as a service territory, seeing upwards of 26,000 plus megawatts of requests. It's astronomical. In that process to kind of better qualify and better understand what projects are more ready to move forward versus the ones that maybe are still kind of shopping. Even having that 16 to 17,000 number, it's still massive, right? So that is at the forefront when we look at this, right? Expanding our power generation options, upgrading grid technologies like Ben started touching on, really understanding the growth across the board, right? So it's not just the large loads Ben talked about. We are seeing growth in every area, right? Residential growth is massive. You can drive anywhere in San Antonio and it continues to expand farther and farther out. The commercial and industrial growth, along with the data center specific large load type growth. So it's huge, right? Our board, like Ben said on Monday, approved our updated generation plan. That's gonna be living. We're gonna continue to upgrade that, to update that. As we see this growth continue, we're going to look at different technologies, right? You're going to see a lot of the familiar things, the natural gas, the nuclear that we already have, solar, wind, batteries. Rudy has said it for a while. I think you'll hear kind of the same message from Frank that every megawatt matters right now. So we are diversifying our portfolio. We're going to continue to be doing that. Every megawatt from every source at the moment really, really matters. But we're going to be thoughtful in how we do that. There's the on-site customer solution piece, right? So all of these things take time. These megawatts to deliver these customers, when you look at the regulatory process that you have to go through, when you look at the material procurement, you get into the construction, it's longer timelines. I think depending on where a customer is in their process and how long of a timeline they can they can look at. Some customers are looking at bringing generation on site to bridge that gap, right? So before we can connect them to the grid, they want the ability to be able to generate power themselves, kind of control the short term of their own destiny. And so, there's those solutions that are being looked at too. That kind of leads into this. So state law as it exists today allows for a customer to generate power when the utility can't connect them yet. Why that's important and why that's relevant is within the city limits of San Antonio, we needed to align with that and help enable these customers to be able to set up that on-site generation, to utilize natural gas to be able to do that. And so we entered into this new service option pilot. It's basically a pilot tariff that is allowing customers to set up these on-site generation solutions. Again, driven by this kind of multi-year planned phase approach of building out transmission. It allows these customers in the short to mid-term to get up and running quicker, utilize that generation on site. And again, the idea here that this is supporting is these customers will end up on the grid. This is not meant for them to permanently be producing their own power, but the idea is to help bridge that gap in the short to mid-term so that they can get up and running faster. Gives us as the utility time to be able to go through the regulatory processes, to be able to construct the transmission and ultimately be able to serve the loads. A big piece here, there are a lot of components that go into setting up generation on site. Complying with all of the relevant environmental and noise regulations, that's important. I think we saw earlier with your presentation a lot of the concerns around the noise, a lot of the concerns around the environmental impacts. those are front of mind for a lot of people. These are pieces that we as CPS Energy don't control, but we're definitely stewards of the community. We view ourselves in that manner, and we have a vested interest in making sure that when these customers are setting up on-site generation, that they're going through the right steps, that they're permitted appropriately, and that's a huge piece of all of this, right? It's not just our ability to serve the gas, but being able to get permitted to run this generation. The idea of this is, it's not a permanent tariff yet. So the idea of this being a pilot program is we're going to work with customers and see how this goes. We're going to gain some information and some understanding from all of this over time and figure out how do we need to adjust as a utility, and ultimately what makes sense in the long term to support this kind of endeavor. Going back to what Ben was talking about before, priorities across the board, right? This is complicated, and we've tried to break it out into some high-level pieces, remembering always that customer priorities: reliability, affordability, cleaner energy, right? That does not change even when we're looking at this massive growth. I think we've shown that in the generation plan that was brought forth to the board. I'll skip over to the commitment, the City of San Antonio Climate Action and Adaptation Plan goals. We're staying aligned with that, right? So it's a challenge to continue to serve the load at scale, to grow at the rate that we're growing. But we believe we're up to the challenge, and we're going to continue to look at this through that lens of the community wanting cleaner energy, and doing the best we can there. Fairness for all customers. Another large challenge, and something else, equity is extremely important to our customers. We've heard them say that to us. So again, keeping that in the conversation as we're continuing to grow. Maintaining long-term power supplies and reserves and reliable power, right? That's another piece, is that reliability component, being able to deliver the power reliably over time, and not lose that as we grow. We don't want to grow too fast. We want to grow at a reasonably quick pace, but not sacrificing anything like safety, reliability, anything like that, right? Policy tools that can help manage the growth and protect customers, right? So what does that look like? We're in a cost of service study right now. What that essentially does is we're looking at how the different rate classes break out and cover costs, right? So we're going to get better, more up-to-date information once that's complete. And something that we're already looking at, and we know that this cost of service study is going to help us kind of with a data-driven approach, is separating out a new large load rate class. It makes sense. It's easy to paint the broad strokes, with additional data, conversation with the community like we're having right here, understanding what's important. I think we'll be able to build a much better framework that addresses a lot of the concerns from a rate perspective, and helps enable that for these larger loads to make sure that they're paying their fair share, and that it's transparent. That's a big piece. Once it's written into a rate, it's out there, it's transparent to the community. Charging fees for the studies, that was a really important piece, right? So we were inundated with requests. Our planning teams, our engineers were working around the clock performing these studies, and it just made sense that we need to recoup, right? That became beyond the cost of doing business just in a normal day-to-day manner. So recovering those fees is really, really important. And we're going to continue to look at where else in the process does it make sense to recover fees. Maybe it doesn't make sense to wait until the meter is spinning. Maybe there's other opportunities as we're performing work to parse out that work and make sure that we're recovering. We're going to continue to look at that. SB6 was huge, and the rules coming from the PUC. Here it's talking about requiring backup generation and mandatory curtailment. That's really important. So, the winter storm it's been several years, yet it's still fresh when we have these sort of conversations and see this large growth. Part of what SB6 is directing the PUC and ERCOT to do is to ensure that these large loads are in a position to be able to come off the grid when asked. And the idea here is that if there are challenges at a state level, or if there are challenges at different points in the grids, that these data centers have the ability to come off the grid, have the ability to continue to run their operations, but relieve pressure on the grid before any of us have to from a commercial or a residential perspective. And that's huge, especially when we look at the number of megawatts that are going to be served to these. To have that flexibility and that ability to be able to come off the grid can really have the potential to relieve problems very, very quickly. And then, of course, there's other pieces going on with the federal government. There was some hearings earlier this week talking about energy usage, water. The federal and state government levels are both really interested in how this pans out. So we're going to be paying very close attention to what comes from that. So there's a lot of different moving pieces, a lot of different components from the policy perspective to make sure that these large loads are paying their fair share, are not putting excess burden on the system, and anything else that makes sense as we continue to learn to have the flexibility to be able to enact. So that wraps up our slides. Are we gonna do questions now? Or?
We have one more speaker.
One more speaker.
Yes.
Perfect. All right. Thank you.
Okay, so we had the data, we did not have the data centers at the initial meeting, but we do have an example of a data center coming into District 3, and the presentation will be done by Russell Jerger, engineer and then VP of Senior Business Development with WGI. So he's going to come and talk about a little of his experience, and why we got this whole thing started is because we knew that they were coming for District 3, and how did we manage that. So, Russell, go ahead, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. So you heard a little bit from these other folks about citywide initiatives. So we're going to zoom in a little bit, and we're going to look at specifically some of the data center projects in District 3 and adjacent to this area, and why they selected this area, and maybe some of give you a little window on the permit process that they've gone through to this point. Just sort of try and peel back the onion a little bit for you guys to see what it's like. So I wanted to show this map. This is a part of the district, obviously, but the white parcels here that are highlighted are 4 separate data center projects that are all within close proximity here. It's about a 3-mile distance as they profile from one project to the other, but they represent close to 2 gigawatts or 2,000 megawatts of power requests and data center development, which is significant when you look at the other numbers that they shared today for this region. So we want to talk about why. So why did they choose these sites? So the first one is electric infrastructure through CPS. There's proximity to that electric infrastructure, both for current and future needs. So I zoomed in a little bit here, but you can see the double yellow line is CPS's main transmission interconnect loop around San Antonio, which I know I'm going to say some of these things wrong. So Ben and his team can correct me if I mess it up, but that is the higher voltage loop around San Antonio, and so it's very close to the primary transmission routes within CPS to provide higher levels of power. You can see those 2 red circles represent existing infrastructure that steps down that power to be used for typical usage. So I'm sure you guys see these around town, but this is a typical transmission station that would turn it from a transmission level power to distribution level power that like you would use at your house. Those were put in place for a number of reasons, but you can see some of the other users here. Toyota Texas, Texas A&M San Antonio were already large power users with big infrastructure needs when they were put in place. And so it put the infrastructure in place from an electrical standpoint available to future data center users. All right, next, water supply. Thank you, Stas, for your presentation as well, but there's a significant amount of water infrastructure here and an existing reclaimed water facility. So one of the water recycling plants that was discussed by Stas earlier is immediately adjacent to these 3 sites. So you can see it there, highlighted in blue with Stas logo. That represents a significant reclaimed water provider or generator within the network that they showed from Stas maps. You can see the pink lines that extend from that are 2 of the major infrastructure pieces that serve reclaimed water around the city, and that gives these sites direct access to reclaimed water within some infrastructure improvements, but really some of them don't even require significant infrastructure improvements. They already have the water, the reclaimed water right there to service their needs. All right, next, zoning regulations. So obviously we talked about noise and the uses right adjacent to maybe a single family subdivision or other consistent uses. This land use here, there are no single family residential uses expected within this zone for a number of reasons. It was zoned for a long time ago for low impact industrial, but also for those of you that know about some of the regulations around Toyota, there are not intended to be any single family uses within a certain distance of Toyota. So there is a significant space between any single family uses and these sites. So this is a zoom in, you can see all of the pink area is zoned, we call MI1, mixed industrial, low impact industrial. It's near two major thoroughfares, so you have good access from a distribution standpoint for your construction projects. And so this area allowed for data centers to come and use these areas without being adjacent to single family uses. Here's sort of a future land use plan. You can see the purple areas are considered civic uses. So that's Texas A&M, that's the San Antonio water system. You can see right at the edge where Toyota starts, that's a higher density industrial use. But there's no single family uses expected here other than those that exist today. And so there is the ability for these projects to not negatively impact neighborhoods as they proceed forward. And so what you ended up with, one other thing, is the TERS access. So a number of the sites are within a tax increment reinvestment zone, which means that the new generated taxes from these sites get reinvested into that zone. So it allows the user to spend more money on public use, whether that's a park or that's expanded utilities, and then repay those as they create tax increment. So that allows a number of these users to put significant investment into public services. I'm not the engineer for all four of those projects, but at least the ones that I'm working on would see somewhere in the neighborhood of $100 to $150 million of public use investment, expanding SAWS and CPS infrastructure to serve themselves, but also, obviously those things have trickle effects to serve others as well. Which is a great incentive from the city without having to provide real dollars. This is the Verano TERS that services a number of those sites. But without the city having to give them direct incentive dollars, they're able to incentivize significant public investments. And so this is one of the things that created this cluster that we saw on this original map of why data centers picked this area. And I'll tell you, having done projects across Texas and around the country with data centers, this type of cluster of infrastructure is something that we actually look for. Can we find other reclaimed water systems? Can we find sewer projects that allow them to use non-potable water to service their projects and near these larger investments of electrical infrastructure? So the second thing we wanted to talk about was what's the process? Now there's a lot on this slide. Everyone's taking pictures anyway, you can look at that and digest it. But this is the schedule of what it's taken to get to today for these projects. So the first discussions we had with the council office and CPS were in July of 2024. So here in just a couple weeks will be 2 years when we had the first conversations about these 4 sites with local community leaders and with CPS. Starting, and I highlighted a couple things that I wanted to note here because they were extensions of our timeline, but they're really one-time scenarios that are now in place permanently. So from August 2024 to March 2025, CPS did a local transmission study to identify opportunities for improvements in your transmission system. That's now completed. We started talking to them right before that started, but we were able to work through that with them and provide them data throughout that. Just after that study, we started coordinating with SAWS. So throughout this process, and this is pretty detailed, I'm not going to go line by line, but we were able to help pilot a number of the scenarios that you heard from SAWS and CPS. So we've been a part of the pilot program for the tariffs with CPS. We've been able to support documentation, I guess, would be the best way with SAWS to put together how we're going to ramp up water usage, how we're going to ramp up reclaimed water usage. What does it look like when SAWS talked about those different systems? So how much water does it take for an evaporative system versus a closed loop system versus an air-cooled system? And a lot of those have been built into this process for us so far. As we kind of ended here with, or in the middle there, in April, ERCOT put in the process that the CPS team talked about, which is the new state level process for any requests over 75 megawatts, which extends this timeline a lot. So as of right now, March 2026 started the first batch zero process through the state, and it is still ongoing. So anything that happened within that process is still ongoing through the ERCOT process. And SAW mentioned as well that they just started the RFP for the reclaimed water system modeling to ensure that they could serve, and we've been supporting them through that. So just about 2 years of process, we are in a position where today we have preliminary draft commitments for water, sewer, and reclaimed water from SAWS, and we have preliminary agreements with CPS that are working their way through the state process and still working on gas delivery through that timeline that we talked about. So it does take quite a long time, I would say, too, in a good way, as a community member of San Antonio myself, too. Very diligent process by both CPS and SAWS to understand what's happening, not just in District 3, but across the city, and how we can work together with community partners like these developers in this area to participate in improvements that make their impact beneficial to the community long term. Just a few future project delivery notes here. I just mentioned this, where we are in the process. I think that we have good folks in the room that can answer a lot of questions about how do we use these developments as community partners. I think that the developers that we've represented in this area have done a good job of interacting with SAWS, CPS, and the city to try and deliver not just good designs, but participation in understanding how these designs impact the community when there's been questions by our utilities. What does it mean if we make this decision versus that decision? And I think as we look at the reasons that there's likely folks here today and some of the concerns you guys talked about, there are good stories from community-centered developments that can provide good value to the community. And I think there, in District 3 in particular, I think you have, at least the ones that I represent, the 3 out of the 4 of those in that picture, I think have really tried hard to make sure that they're coordinating with your utilities and with the community to deliver a better project, not just for themselves, but for the community. Those don't always make the news, but I think that there are a lot of partners like that. And the last thing I'd say is I think that we're learning a lot from these processes that we just outlined in the schedule ahead of this. New modeling by CPS, new modeling by SAWS that are going to give us best practices for technologies moving forward. I mentioned this, but we've been piloting with SAWS and with CPS. What happens if we make certain decisions? If this is a water-cooled system, how much water does that actually use on a per megawatt basis? What if it's a closed loop? What if it's air-cooled? What's the impact of air-cooled if we're going to then, that creates more power needs, so we have to go back to CPS. So how as a community do we work through this decision-making tree? Also, I think identifying locations like this one that I think are prime locations for this type of development and ensuring that we're putting them in a place to be successful and to take the positive impacts of development in this area and make them beneficial for the community. So those are some of the things that we've worked on with these particular folks within District 3. Certainly happy to answer questions after the council members.
Hey, and just to share about Russell, is he did serve on what's now the South Texas Business Partnership for 2 years. He was the chair during the pandemic, correct?
Yes.
So he was very familiar with the South Side and knew what was necessary. And then, as I mentioned, my staffer, my director of zoning and planning, Chris Villa, when he came and talked to us, we knew what questions to ask. And so that kind of is what we want to hear, is we knew our community, we knew what questions they would ask, and we want to hear from you. And the panel is here. They'll stay. Are there microphones? Can you go? You can just tap your microphone if the question is for you. But I do want to acknowledge that our president of Texas A&M San Antonio was here. He had to step out, Dr. Ochoa, and part of the reason he was here is because, as you noticed, Texas A&M was on that last presentation. Alexandria from State Representative Liz Campos' office is here. We have a Harlandale representative, Ms. Martinez is here. We have a number of city staff, and we do have a Metro Chamber, and I believe Hispanic Chamber was here. So if you have questions, of course, District 5 is here taking notes, and I'm going to take all this information back. So if I missed anybody from any district council, please let me know. They were there at the stakeholder meeting. They have this information also, but we do want to get your input and your questions. We heard a lot of what Dr. Dyer put up, the words, water usage, timeline, things like that. If you'd like to expand on that or the question, now is the time. So we'll go ahead and you can raise your hand and we will have someone come up and ask the question.
Thank you, Councilwoman Viagran. Thank you for your efforts to bring us together today. I want to say I'm a stakeholder for the San Antonio Manufacturers Association, and one of my questions is always based about cost of service. Is very important between SAWS and CPS Energy. So what I heard earlier in this discussion, and I need some clarity on this, I heard the word maintenance, and I don't know that maintenance is recoverable at this point of what it takes from an energy request or from an infrastructure investment or an on-site generation request, as who's going to maintain this service that you're bringing to these data centers. I heard it's not recoverable and it has to be absorbed by CPS and SAWS. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe I heard wrong.
I'll start. So yes, the maintenance costs, all costs are recoverable through, at least through SAWS obviously. That is through our rates. So our rate system, so whoever is maintaining that gets to put it into the rates, in other words, SAWS. So if we put in these lines and pumps and everything, we have to maintain those on an ongoing basis. That gets filtered into the rates that the customers pay. There's a separate, what's called an impact fee. If you're a brand new company and you want to build your system onto ours, that's a fee that you pay from the beginning, and that pays for the impact that you're having to the system. But the ongoing maintenance of the system is all put into the rates. So those are recoverable through, in this case, the recycled water rates.
And I'll just add to that, the cost of service study that we do is it's similar. We recover the cost for maintenance thing. But I did have a question for you. Can you clarify? So normal rates, we have the cost of service process that's been existing that we use, and that's a normal process that we have to allocate costs for residential, small commercial, large commercial type customers, right? But you mentioned on-site generation. Can you talk a little bit more about, is that, because you kind of had two questions in here.
Yes, I wrote that note. I wrote infrastructure investments, and I believe I heard it in the context of the data centers have to make infrastructure investments. And is it clear that they have to maintain the on-site generation if they go on-site? Do they maintain that, or does CPS have to maintain some of that?
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Yeah, we are currently, the data center that we have right now, like anything that we provide them and we own and operate and maintain goes into that rate class. Anything about the generation or on-site generation is maintained and operated by the customer themselves, and there's nothing that goes into any rates for CPS Energy.
Thank you everyone for being here. Put together this useful information. I have a couple questions for CPS. Ben, Nick, thanks for your presentation, very useful. The first one is on the new service option pilot, which I understand is an on-site generation to fill the gaps until the utility comes into place. Is that an intention to be like at first behind the meter with grid export capabilities to convert to in front of meter once the infrastructure is in place? Or does it need to be born at the beginning as an in front of meter solution for the options? My second question is around the SB6 curtailment, mandatory curtailments that you know, you need to use your backup generation probably more often than expected. Would that be aligned with the air permits required for that infrastructure? Because on the air permit, you have a limited number of hours you can run on your backup generators. And so if by mandatory curtailments, you're expected to run your generators in a much longer periods of time, would that affect the air permits?
I'll start again. Great question. Yeah, so you're spot on. Because the customers ask, and I say the large customers have asked for, you know, amount of energy that requires large infrastructure to be built. There's a time period in there that kind of Russell mentioned that it's going to take a while to go through the regulatory process and build large infrastructure providing power in, for example. So that is in the event that the PURA laws in the state of Texas allow a customer to self-generate and provide their own energy. Now, what PURA law says is that because the utility has a longer time frame and they want to use that energy sooner, they are enabled to self-generate. And so that's really what that NSO pilot tariff we had is an augmentation of a gas rate that we have, because we saw, to kind of dovetail into your question about emissions, right? Historically and typically, the data center customers back themselves up with diesel generation. With the Senate Bill 6 implementation of having to run longer, we see an uptake in our natural gas service requirements, which is cleaner than diesel, which in theory will allow them to run longer, maybe not at the larger energy requests that they've made of us, but in order for that data center customer to bridge the gap for a period of time while they get back on the grid. So to answer your question, it evolves over time. It starts, and it's customer specific, so it depends. So I think day one you could start with it as being an integrated piece, or you could start with it being an isolated source and then converting into the grid to provide that resource, because they're going to have to be in compliance with Senate Bill 6 regulations. And the reason why we started this pilot was because we needed to get ahead of it, but because by law we have to enable that.
All right, Dee Dee and I served together on the rate advisory committee.
I'm going to have a hand up first. So. Yeah, my question's for Donovan. So we have talked to folks who do these data centers at closed loop. They're talking about like every 8 years, this recycled water is going to be severely polluted. Like, what are your plans for disposal? And then what requirements would you have for treatment, pre-treatment, if any, before any wastewater gets disposed from these facilities?
Yeah, good question. The wastewater side of it doesn't get talked about a whole lot, and so there is a process in place through the TCEQ, and we have what's called a pre-treatment process, a pre-treatment program, and so we work with the industry, in fact, the manufacturers a lot, to make sure that whatever is being discharged into our system, that we are able to treat it at the wastewater systems. So the data centers, should there be something that we are unable to treat at our plant, they will have a pre-treatment on site to handle.
So that would involve y'all knowing what constituents are in the, okay.
Yes, yes. They have to tell us what constituents they plan to discharge into our sewer system. We have to know that up front, and that's where we go through that process. That's the pre-treatment.
You have to hold it? Okay, that's cool. Councilwoman Viagran, thank you for hosting this. I hope that you will continue to get ahead of the growth of data centers if it is going to continue to happen in your district. I think what you're doing here is important. This might be a rhetorical question or statement, and it's leaning more towards the energy side, but I want to just share some data. CPS Energy's current system peaks at about 6,000 megawatts of power during this summer. By 2035, they expect to add another 2,000 megawatts. Large load customers drawing more than 40 megawatts are expected to make up half. The majority of them would be data centers. So growth is expected to be about 30 to 33% over the next decade, and 50% of that potentially coming from data centers. Population growth in Bexar County is expected to increase by 4.9% by 2030. Commercial demand is expected to increase 104% from 2026 to 2040. And a little over 30% from residential customers. So I'm a clean energy advocate with Public Citizen. I talk to a lot of people in District 6 about data centers and their concerns that they have about them. My question or comment is, like, how do we justify that to residential customers, considering these data centers that are in neighborhoods, like residential neighborhoods, maybe not the ones that you're speaking about just right now. The backup generation being polluting diesel generators. Those have serious health impacts, right, and environmental impacts. What do we tell that residential customer about this explosion of data centers, 16 gigawatts? That isn't sustainable. And I don't care what university study is saying that we can manage this, or the utility is saying we can manage that. That is not sustainable. Thank you.
So the reason, the one thing, we need to grow. The city is growing. I mean, it's not that we need to grow. We are growing. And we want to be thoughtful about this process. And I thank you, Dee Dee, for your input, and it's a good question. But that is why we want to hear from the public, and why I want to move on the academic and the research type process. Because the thing is, the pilot programs are great. And I'm so glad that CPS and SAWS are doing that. And water's a different story than energy. But when it comes to energy and the service that we did on the Rate Advisory Committee, is if these data centers, instead of putting in their pilot with the fix, can invest in our generational growth within CPS, whether that's nuclear, whether that is solar, whether that is wind, would they and can they be willing to do that? And that's the one thing I think we have an opportunity to ask of some of these data centers, is will you be part of our generational planning? Instead of going diesel, will you look at the opportunities CPS currently has to do cleaner energy and to push us towards that goal? And that's why I am wanting to take a look and invited Dr. Dyer to be here to see when can we ask that question. And if we can demand that, because we know with SAWS and CPS, we are a location, and Russell's presentation showed it, is that they're looking at, why can't we ask them, give to our generational energy that we're trying to do here within CPS, that we want to be cleaner. The one thing about the Rate Advisory Committee, and you knew I was disappointed, is I wanted everything in that toolkit. And I wanted more. I do believe nuclear energy is the cleanest energy, and we have opportunities to do it safely, but that's not the direction we went in. So can we pivot, because we have an industry that's willing to, because I don't know how much they're willing to spend on these diesel-fueled kind of patchwork before they get connected. But that's why we're here, and that's why I want to take the academic growth. So we'll definitely, because that's the question we do need to ask, is what is the trade-off? Are there unintended consequences? Who is out there that's willing to come in and invest and believe in San Antonio? One of the reasons we asked Russell to come and present is because his data centers, when they came in, and this was Chris, the first question he asked, had they purchased the property, or are they looking into purchasing the property? Because that speaks volumes when it comes to if you want to be here in San Antonio. And of course they had purchased the property, which is why they're presenting here today, because they understood that they were willing to make a commitment. And that's why some of you, what we want to hear in terms of community benefits, where you want to give to the parks, is we want to hear from you too, and you have the QR code and the emails to reach out to us, is because we want to know what questions to ask, because it is coming. And how do we do this thoughtfully? And a moratorium, while is a quick, like, emergency stop for some, it's not forever. And we're going to be subject to whatever the state decides. And that's why when we part of this other reason is where do we go to the state and what do we ask them for in legislation as they go into their session. So thank you for that question and that comment, and these are just one of the reasons we're coming in. Dr. Dyer, you want to share a little also?
I would like to just make a quick comment and thank you for sharing your concerns and the this one and the different projections. In fact, hold it. Can you hear me? Yeah. In fact, for the past more than 5 years, we've had a National Science Foundation funded project to study specifically the trends, the growing projections for water, energy, food. So looking not only at the growth of the urban city center, but also of the agriculture and the energy development, and really calling for developing the right analytics and tools that really look at all of these systems in a holistic manner and really look at the interconnectedness between those resource systems. And now we have a new sector with data centers that is also competing over these same resources with these growing sectors. So yes, it is very important for us to do the right analytical work and to guide the development and the progress of any future development in evidence and in evaluating the different levers and interventions we can make, either at the technological level to make things more efficient, at the infrastructure level, at the policy level. But we need to properly evaluate those scenarios and those possibilities, and evaluate those based on metrics that are of interest to the community, the different economic, social, environmental metrics. So again, not to take sides with or against, but to say that there's a need to objectively evaluate different pathways and different scenarios and different possibilities, and then make a better informed decision based on that.
Are there any other questions? Anyone want to ask questions about the noise, about...
Yes.
Oh.
I have a multitude of questions, but I'm going to prioritize out of respect. So I'm thinking, I have a solar company, so I'm in the solar specs sector. When the government needed to bring about change relative to climate change and so forth, what they did is they had a mandate where they provided the customers with incentives, including CPS doing a lot of incentives to bring about the change that was necessary to meet those goals. I'm wondering if we can help subsidize, not us, I'm thinking the players, the large commercial companies, if they would be willing to participate in expanding some of those projects that the government, incentivized in the past, like the rooftop solar and so forth. Right now, we have batteries that are capable of powering while we have brown and blackouts, and I feel like it would be very important for the community to have access to those, especially that we have a lot of people here that are military retired, and some of them have health issues, and they are depending on machines and so forth. Have we looked into possibly subsidizing solar and battery for those people, and since we are going to be bombarding the grid, which is already very fragile. The other thing is, I was wondering about the atmospheric machines that are gaining popularity around the world, where the machine actually makes water out of thin air, either on the side of the data centers or on the side of the public, to be able to mitigate the loss of water that is going to be affecting us. And also, if they're looking to spend money on alternatives, like competitions and so forth, because I haven't seen any of that for the data centers. They're just using existing infrastructure and existing technology. I haven't seen any kind of movement towards, with the amount of money that they have, the reach that they have. I feel like it could be very beneficial for the cities that they're going into to be able to have those open competitions to solve problems.
Thank you, and this is kind of what I, as the elected official, want to hear in terms of what would you like to see us ask for in terms of, and not just of data centers, but all of the bigger companies that are coming in. Where do we as San Antonio want to prioritize, and what we need help with? And one thing that is priority and top of mind is our energy, as our utilities, and how we pay for them, and how we fund some of those programs in the past. So thank you for that. We'll definitely take that into consideration, and that's kind of what we want to hear from you. We'll take 2 more questions because I want to be mindful of your time, and then what we'll do is you have. We'll put up the information. We'll play a video as you leave, but we will put up the information, and you can reach out to our office. You can reach out to the District 3 staff if you feel you want to reach out to your council member in particular. Go ahead. We also have the Office of Resiliency and Sustainability, and we're all going to share the information that we're getting currently from you, because I know you're like, well, I don't know District 3, I don't live in the South Side, but please reach out. So we'll take 2 more questions, and then we'll wrap up with the video. Yes, Stephanie.
Yes, I have concerns about noise pollution. Well, I call it noise pollution, but I talked to people at TCEQ, and they don't consider noise as a pollution. And I think that because of the amount of noise that these data centers are producing, not even in the air, but I've been reading articles about underground waves called infrasound that is affecting humans, animal and wildlife, and even food crops. And where is the research there? And TCEQ told me, well, in order for them to get involved, there would need to be laws passed to, bills passed to get them to consider it a pollution for them to be involved in it. So what is being done in the interim regarding these noises? A lot of people ask about it when in the questionnaire, but nobody asked about it verbally. So that was one of my main concerns that nobody touched on, was noise.
No, and thank you, Stephanie. And that's Dr. Dyer. I don't know if you want to talk about noise, or if you have, if you can get follow-up questions for the surveys for those that were here, so we can put it out there. When you talk noise and noise pollution, what specifically are you talking about? The generators that are the electricity 24/7, just the different sounds that you have. So, did you want to share a little on that? What you can do as we go on?
Thank you again for this input. This is something we'll also look into as we look at prototype case studies that we'll look at in evaluating the impact of different data centers. The underground vibration thing is new to me. I'm looking forward to learning more about that and seeing what's out there in different studies, and certainly looking at that as a dimension also in evaluating and as part of the assessment that we do.
Thank you. And the last question right here before the video.
Yes, thank you. So, in the manufacturing world, noise means the intensity of noise generated within your production facilities. OSHA plays a big role in dictating to manufacturing organizations that you have to maintain certain quality control to protect your employees with hearing. So that being said, I have OSHA in the picture. I don't know that OSHA is in the picture with data centers. I know at the first meeting I might have mentioned something about noise, and if your maintenance people are exposed to noise, then they have to be protected. But the response from one of the members here, one of the stakeholders here was, oh no, we turn off the whole system, and then they can go in and do a hands-on fix. Okay, now that one I wasn't real clear that I bought into that, but I understand. So the existing data centers where constituents are complaining now about noise, they're ongoing. My question is the future development of data centers. So is there a way to factor a control of noise? Hearing that TCEQ has, the way she explained it, it's correct. It has to go through a process. The city of San Antonio doesn't have a way to control noise. So my question is, what do we do in the noise control in the future?
I mean, one way we need to look at it is with the different current zoning requirements that we have, and perhaps spacing requirements between data centers and any adjacent houses or urban development. Perhaps something that could be looked into, as well as I've seen cases where data centers have constructed different barriers or trees around the data centers to kind of mitigate some of that noise. So it will be important to look at different scenarios that could help mitigate those impacts, either by design, by building those data centers far enough that they don't impact people, or develop different solutions on site.
Yeah, and again, that is where I think Amin and Logan and the whole process where we go through DSD is, do we have what we need in our current ordinance? Do we need to expand? We need to look at that and then look at the current data centers we do have. Again, the example that Russell gave with ours in District 3, and that's not going to be all of them, but in that one in particular, we're in rural area. But right now, that's not the situation in District 6, and that's where if you are in that district, if you talk to those people, please have them reach out so we can get them the information and they can tell us specifically about the noise, about the lights, so as we move forward, we can ask those questions in terms of how we do it how we make it better here currently too, and research that. So we're going to go ahead and close. Thank you so much for being such an incredible group of participating. We'll be here for a little while to clean up and close up, so if you'd like to stay and have any questions, but we do have a video of our first meeting. Please put your questions on here.
Community stakeholders joined San Antonio City Council members and representatives from CPS Energy and SAWS for a high-level briefing on a topic of rising importance: data center development in San Antonio.
The goal from this meeting is to have as much dialogue as possible so we could learn across different districts. There are many districts that are hosting data centers that we can learn from their experiences, the impact of these data centers, positive and negative.
I wanted to make sure that we gave you a chance to kind of share your thoughts up to this point.
District 3 Council Member Phyllis Viagran assembled this working session presented by leading data center academic Dr. Bassel Dyer of the Texas A&M Energy Institute.
The bottom line from the discussions that we've had so far is that local leaders that need to make these decisions of approving those data centers do not have the tools and the evidence to support evidence-based decision making, to make informed decisions that prioritize the priorities of their communities, of their districts, to ensure that we are mitigating any negative unintended consequences.
Texas is one of the fastest growing locations for data center development in the nation, according to Dr. Dyer, because of affordable electricity prices, abundant land availability, and that San Antonio serves as a relevant case to study data center development with the construction of several data centers under consideration, including in District 3.
The latest number is 56 data centers across San Antonio.
Dr. Dyer concluded his presentation by noting that CPS Energy is planning a 30% increase in electricity demand over the next decade, with data centers being a primary driver, and that San Antonio data centers consumed millions of gallons of water during drought conditions at a time when residents were told to water once a week. Power and water challenges notwithstanding, Dr. Dyer's that San Antonio has tools to deal with data center growth that make it unique for a Texas city.
It does have the municipally owned utilities that answer to council. So again, this could be a really valuable way and model to have these discussions and be able to have these discussions before rather than after making those agreements with those data centers.
Participants emerged from the meeting sounding encouraged about the level of dialogue and the opportunity presented by District 3 to learn more about data centers.
I appreciate the conversation. Data centers and the potential impact on our community are a major priority, and it's an evolving issue that there aren't clear answers. So being able to get really the key stakeholders around the table to at least begin the conversation is really the first step.
Was grateful to hear from our utilities and see how prepared we are and the things we're talking about, because we are different from everyone else because it's municipally owned utilities, because of our positioning, our topography, the military presence. There are so many things that make San Antonio different here, and being in Texas as well, the legislative side of this. I just really appreciate having everyone convene in one space, and it makes sense then to bring in stakeholders and hear their perspectives and just be the leaders in this. It's a great opportunity for San Antonio.
We have heard everything in the news. We know that they can contribute to our tax base, but at what expense? What does it mean? How can we get the biggest kind of return on our investment as a community with these data centers coming in? And the other thing is understanding how it's related to AI and this growth that we have coming globally on artificial intelligence.
When we look at potential impact of data centers to almost double the energy consumption in our community, that's going to translate to an impact. And it's going to make our job that much harder to reduce those emissions. So while data centers are an important tool for our society right now, we have to figure out a sustainable way for them to integrate in our communities where they're not impacting air quality, they're not using excessive amounts of energy and water, and that any potential burdens aren't falling on our community, particularly those that are the most vulnerable and struggling just to pay their bills.
When we talk about the data centers coming, we need to ask questions. And we need to ask ourselves, are we asking the right questions that move this city forward?
All right, thank you. There's our information. Thank you all for participating. We really appreciate you, and have a great afternoon.